Here are some thoughts on Anne Bradstreet, the poet, for this week. You had three poems. The poems are written in standard 17th century English. And also it's interesting to point out that the poems sound as though you are reading the King James Version of the Bible. If you're familiar with that version of the Bible, you have a number of these and thous in the passages. In all of the poems, there is a sense of humility running through each one. There is nothing haughty or proud about them, no boasting. That sense of humility is quintessential Puritanism. There is also a sense of solemnity in the poems, which is also typical of Puritanism. The copy of the poems that you're looking at is an example of annotation. Annotation means note-taking. I hope that you printed out the poems and made notes such as I have done, and that's why I'm giving you an example of this. This is how your poem should look. If you're looking at the first poem, the author to her book, notice that she compares. The poem is built on an extended metaphor or analogy. She compares her book to offspring. Thou ill-formed offspring of my feeble brain. In other words, she's saying that she doesn't have the ability to bring forth this child/book, who after birth didst by my side remain, till snatched from thence by friends less wise than true, who thee abroad exposed to public view, made thee in rags halting to thy press to trudge. Where errors were not lessened, all may judge. So she is talking about a fatal flaw, that her poems are not perfect. At thy returning my blushing was not small. She's embarrassed. My rambling brat in print should mother call. She compares again, and she's using another metaphor here, comparing her poems to a brat. I cast thee by as one unfit for light. Thy visage, meaning face, was so irksome in my sight. Yet, being mine own, at length affection would thy blemishes amend, if so I could. But notice she's trying to take care of her poems as she would a child. I washed thy face, but more defects I saw, and rubbing off a spot still made a flaw. I stretched thy joints to make thee even feet. Now this is an interesting image because if you're familiar with poems, feet refers to the rhythm of a line. Yet still thou runnest more hobbling than is meet. In better dress to trim thee was my mind. But none sought homespun cloth. That's a quintessential settler's image. Homespun cloth. The settlers, of course, made their own clothing. In the house I find. In this array amongst vulgars mayest thou roam. In critics' hands beware thou dost not come, and take thy way where yet thou art not known. Now here's another interesting play on word. Art, meaning you, and art, meaning creation, creating art. If for thy father ask, say thou hast none, and for thy mother, she alas is poor, which causes her thus to send thee out of door. Now, father can also be seen as that the child is a bastard, that the child is illegitimate, and it may be a biblical reference to a heavenly father. But what I want you to see in my notes is that this is what you should be doing. You should be highlighting things. You should be looking for repetition. You should be looking for imagery that the poet uses. You should be looking at comparisons. She has an analogy here, an extended comparison, and all of these together make the meaning of the poem. So she's using a kind of homely example, comparing her poems to being a mother. The next poem, before the birth of one of her children, if I ask you what this poem would mean, or what do you expect of it before you read it, you would think that she is writing about the anticipation of a child. Ironically, she's writing about a death, her death. If she dies in childbirth, she is leaving her husband this poem. It's what's called a valedictory or farewell poem, because the whole thing is about dying. And she's addressing her husband. All things within this fading world hath end. Now you would think if a mother's about to give birth, she would be talking about new life. Adversity doth still our joys attend. This is a typical settler's Puritan example because they are inundated with adversity. No tie so strong, no friend so dear and sweet, but with death's parting blow is sure to meet. The sentence passed is most irrevocable, a common thing, yet, oh, inevitable. How soon, my dear, death may my steps attend. She's referring to her husband. How soon may be thy lot to lose thy friend. We are both ignorant, yet love bids me these farewell lines to recommend to thee, that when that knot's untied that made us one, I may seem thine, who in effect am none. In other words, she's being taken away, and also again a theme here of humility, which is typical Puritanism, and also humility is a religious quality. And if I see not half my days, that's due. What nature would God grant to yours and you? That many faults that will you know I have. Once again, notice she has found fault with her poetry. She's finding fault with herself. It's kind of a confession. Let be interred in my oblivious grave. If any worth or virtue were in me, let thy live freshly in thy memory. And when thou feelst no grief, as I do no harms, yet love thy dead, who long lay in thine arms. And when thy loss shall be repaid with gains, look to my little babes, my dear remains. So there's a sense of immortality here by referring to the children. And if thou love thyself, or lovest me, these, O protect from step dame's injury, woman's injury. And if chance to thine eyes shall bring this verse, with some sad sighs honor my absent hearse. And kiss this paper for thy love's dear sake, who with salt tears this last farewell did take. So here the poem is a physical manifestation of herself. She is entreating her husband to kiss the poem as a remnant of herself. So again, you have a sense of humility and a sense of loss, and it's not a hopeful poem. You would certainly not send this in a greeting card to someone who is about to give birth. It's an interesting take. The last poem, Verses upon the Burning of Our House, July 10th, 1666, is obviously the most religious poem because of the way it's organized. I'm not going to read the entire poem, but again, I'd like for you to notice the annotation, the notes. I have circled key words, key themes. I have looked up definitions of words to make sure I know the meaning of them. For example, piteous, arousing pity. She refers to succorless, meaning a lack of support. Repine, to express discontent. Bereft, lacking something. If you don't know the meanings of the words, it's impossible to know the meaning of the poem. We know the poem is about her house. She hears the words fire, fire. She talks about let no man know is my desire. I, starting up, the light did spy, and to my God my heart did cry. And she asks for strength in her distress. Not to leave her without support. She goes out of the dwelling, she looks at it, that laid my goods now in the dust. Yea, so it was, and so 'twas just. It was his own, it was not mine. Far be it that I should repine, that is, express discontent. She continues to survey the loss. My sorrowing eyes aside did cast, and here and there the place espy, where oft I sat and long did lie. So she looks at the things she's lost, pleasant things. She talks about her roof, her table, pleasant talk, recounted, retold stories there, the candle. But then the poem is built on two parts. There is a reversal, and she begins to change the way she's viewing things. She says, I do, saying goodbye, all's vanity. And once again, if you're familiar with the Bible, you know that that is a reference to Ecclesiastes. All is vanity. We have another reference to the Bible at the end. Then she begins to chide or criticize her heart. And did thy wealth on earth abide? She begins to change things, and she begins to talk about not an earthly dwelling, but her heavenly dwelling. And skipping down a couple of lines, the arm afresh didst make thy trust, raise up my thoughts above the sky, that dunghill mist away may fly. Thou hast a house on high erect, framed by that mighty architect. And notice that this is also a metaphor. She's capitalized architect. Obviously, that's a reference to God. This is a permanent house, she thinks. It's purchased and paid for, too, by him who hath enough to do. Then she continues, a price so vast as is unknown, yet by his gift is made thine own. There's wealth enough, I need no more. So the wealth of the world has receded, and she's looking at the wealth of heaven. I need no more, farewell my pelf, meaning money, farewell my store, meaning possessions. The world no longer let me love, my hope and treasure lies above. Now, once again, here's a biblical reference. If you are familiar with the Bible, you will see this as a reference to Matthew chapter 6, verse 19, which reads, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. So this is the most biblical poem. It goes from mourning her possessions to redirecting her thoughts to heaven, and that's, of course, quintessentially Puritanism. And so I like the way this poem is organized. You have a nice reversal, and she goes from looking downward and inward to her possessions to upward. Now, what am I looking for in this answer? I'd like for you to say something about peace. I'd like for you to say something about solemnity. I'd like for you to say something about humility. I'd like for you to say something about the lack of pride. I'd like for you to say something about the religion. And the last poem, of course, as I've said, is the most obviously religious. So there's not a sense of haughtiness here. There's not a sense of self-centeredness here. She has humbled herself. And I like these poems because, to me, they capture emotionally and spiritually what Puritanism is all about. It's their seriousness. It's their humility. It's their solemnity. I hope that helps.